Go.
Welcome to With Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends get together and talk about their star signs. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, we talk about the news and events that will shape our uncertain future as the American empire collapses and we deal with the fallout of building a society on non-renewable resources and ecosystem destruction. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host and producer, Zach.
Hello. I'm a Sagittarius.
You're a Sagittarius. I am a Libra, but I don't know anything
Sagittarius
beyond that. So in our Thursday discussion, we missed a couple news items. So we're going to start with those. We're going to talk a little bit about the Ohio train derailment. I just wanted to draw attention to one thing in particular. And then we're going to talk a little bit about SVB, Silicon Valley Bank failure. And we're not going to dwell too much on it, but just have a quick conversation about what that means. And does it portend another collapse of the banking system, a la the banking system failure that defined my entire adult life, having graduated college like just a month before that shit imploded?
Sucker.
And drove many of my economic decisions for myself and my family. But we are going to talk a bit about that. And then we are going to use the latter half to discuss astrology and this bizarre, I don't know what you want to call it, but there's just this kind of trend.
It's been a resurgence, I would say. I mean,
that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was very popular back in the 50s. I mean, basically, anytime things are a little uncertain, people turn and look for meaning. And
yeah, and we can discuss that more in the latter half of the show.
Yeah.
Quick check-in. We are a day late. Always $1 short. We're broke as fuck, but that's cool. That's why you need to like, subscribe. And we don't even have a subscriber count that allows super chats and or channel memberships yet.
So. I think you need like 1,000 or something like that.
It's not a high bar, but we're not.
I'm over here. Yet. I'm over here with 8.
Hey man, 8's better than 0.
We had 7 last week, and then I went to a beer club meeting and talked to another couple for. Must have been like 4 hours, and the husband subscribed. So hey, if he even checks in once, we're good there.
Yeah.
Hey, Francisco,
so we're just going to continue doing what we do and continue to get better and continue to talk about the things that fucking matter. So with that, let's get started with the. We're going to do a clip from France 24 about some riots in Athens.
Fucking love riots.
Thank you, France 24.
Thousands gathered in Athens to protest against systemic failings, which led to 57 deaths in Greece's worst ever train disaster. Tensions between police and protesters mounted as petrol bombs were hurled. The collision between a passenger train and an oncoming freight train has triggered anger across the country, with many blaming government neglect.
Yes, you feel angry because the government did nothing for all those kids. The public transport is a mess, basically. And yes, now all those people are here to support and show that something must be done.
Strikes which began earlier in the day brought Greece's transport system to a standstill as workers across several sectors walked out to express their discontent. It's the latest in a series of demonstrations, some which turned violent, since the crash on February 28th. On Sunday, Greece's Prime Minister apologised for any responsibility the government had in causing the disaster, an apology reiterated by the new Transport Minister this Wednesday, who took office after his predecessor resigned last week.
The responsibility that belongs to the government has been assumed. The system will not restart until there's a technological upgrade and only under improved security conditions.
The government initially blamed human error. The station master at the time of the crash is currently facing charges of manslaughter. But the Prime Minister, who faces elections this summer, has now promised to cooperate with an inquiry into the collision.
Okay, great. Well, that basically covers almost everything that I wanted to say about it. So we can skip the, I'll just show it real quick. But up my screen. You are. Thank you.
Mm.
Here's a headline from the New York Times. Station manager faces court, but Greeks see a scapegoat for official neglect. Here is a photograph of the train derailment. And then it goes into a little bit about what caused it. In that France 24 clip, they mentioned that it was human error. And what had happened basically is that there was a signal that wasn't working. And so rather than like going through the process of fixing that signal and like stopping transport, they
Right.
were relying on like a verbal kind of like like a communication system between different individuals involved to be like, oh no, it's good. Right. So the engineers could go even though the signals told them not to go. And they fucked up and they said go ahead and go when it wasn't safe to go. And that system based on that article, and you can come back up, Doc Bay 84 or 94. That system actually had worked. My understanding is for quite a while they were using that system, and then
They were just bypassing the electronic interlocks to shoot people
yeah, there
forward.
was a signal, a visual signal for the conductors.
Wow.
And that signal was malfunctioning or not doing its job, not switching.
Right.
And so they're just like, okay, we'll just radio back. And then we have people that track trains and we'll just tell you it's good to go. And they were using that system.
Yeah.
And mistakes happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Communication breakdowns happen. That's why in aviation and on trains, apparently, I learned through this derailment disaster in Ohio that they all have black boxes. And so, like, all communications are recorded so that when the government needs to investigate an accident and find out a cause so that they can make policy to prevent similar incidents in the future, they have all the communications and stuff. So it was just that it sounds largely human error.
I mean, it sounds like there was already a system in place that was supposed to prevent this. They refused to fix it in a timely manner, and instead falling back on a manual system, and something horrible happened.
Yeah, and that I do not know the details like concretely, but that does appear to me what happened.
Yeah.
What I do want to draw attention, there's a few things in that France 24 thing that I find remarkably different. And the reason that we wanted to show this and discuss the Ohio train derailment in the specific context of this fatal, like pretty awful crash. I think it's the worst passenger train disaster in Greece's history. Greece's history. It killed like 50 or 60 people, and then they injured like hundreds, like some of them severely injured. I wanted to draw attention to a few things. So first of all, as that news article says, oh, you're trying to scapegoat and like bury this train operator when it was a systemic issue, right? Well, they're at least holding someone criminally responsible.
Right. Yeah.
Which we have not yet done.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And probably never will. That was the thing. We were just like, well, that's part of the cost of, capitalism and doing business is train wrecks and horrible, contamination of, local environments. And there's nothing that can be done about that, I guess. Okay, carry on.
So yeah, someone's being held criminally liable on the point of safety and pollution and just kind of moving on. You saw the prime minister there literally say, this is not reopening until we figure this shit out. Right. The whole reason that they fucking burned those trains and created that toxic disaster is to clear, so they could clear the tracks more quickly so that they could resume moving trains.
Yeah.
Like literally much of the disaster in Ohio, as I understand it, again, with like kind of like not a super intimate knowledge, but having read press briefs from the NTSB, from Norfolk Southern, and press coverage of it. My understanding is that the whole reason that they burned those trains was so that they could get the tracks opened so they could continue to move freight and make money. And, we do this great service for, the American economy, which trains are essential to economic activity.
And their initial reasoning was, well, we have these chemicals, and if we don't burn them, they'll get into the water. The air will take it away quicker. Let's burn it.
Yeah. Yeah. My understanding was that part of the reason they made the decision to burn was to clear the tracks more quickly.
Yeah.
rather than like
I believe
spending
it.
a few days trying to figure out some kind of containment system, or otherwise like putting the fires out and then trying to remove the chemicals from the space. That would cost a lot of money and take a long time, so they just fucking burned them.
Yeah.
Which has created, like you said, all this like ecological catastrophe, which is often in the kind of press, it's a kind of artistic flourish. They're calling it like an American Chernobyl, because that's how bad like the long-term effects of this will be on that community and those ecosystems. So there's the second point. They shut the so they are going to prosecute. They detained and are going to prosecute individuals who were responsible. Um, they shut the train system down until they could look at safety. That's another one. A big one. The transportation secretary in that France 24 clip, they said he resigned in shame. His fuck up was so bad that he was just like, I'm so sorry that this happened under my watch. I resign. You know, the prime minister issued a national apology. We've gotten, that's the fourth point, is that he issued a national apology. So on points 3 and 4, like the federal government in Greece took responsibility for it, even if they're also holding, you know, other people further down the chain responsible for their role in that fuck up, right? But you have the prime minister be like, we are so sorry and we are going to fix this. Biden barely said anything. They didn't say anything for fucking days until basically like social media and local reporting like forced the federal government to say something about it.
Right. And in America, it's not the government's responsibility to fix the railway or anything like that. It's privately owned. So the most we could do is be like, hey, you're gonna fix that, right? You know, and maybe we can take away some of your licensing if you don't, but we would never do that.
No, yeah. So like, and Buttigieg finally, I think, went. Joe Biden still has not gone. And it's being referred to as an American Chernobyl. Like, it's like, I mean, it's not the same as 9/11, but fuck, man, like it's pretty close in terms of like its impact on a people. And like the governor of Ohio has been there, the mayor of the town has been there. Norfolk Southern largely avoided showing up in person and saying like, oh well, we're afraid for our safety, as like all these people who've been poisoned and can't get a straight fucking answer on anything, and are dealing with like, oh, you think your water is you know, contaminated, or your house smells funny. Well, here, because we love this community and we're an honest, you know, company that deals in good faith, here, we will pay for you to have it tested, but here's the number to call. And it's like a company hired by by Norfolk Southern, who has a track record in past dealings, like past business, of not doing an adequate job and like falsifying papers to say it's better than it isn't, or it complies when it doesn't comply. And so like these people are fucking upset, and Norfolk Southern's like, well, we're afraid for our safety if we go to a meeting when like these people are in a community that's literally like killing them. Right. Like,
And I had heard about that, you know, that they're like, well, we're not going there. It's like, yeah, because you'd probably get dragged out in the street and you get the shit kicked out of you.
Yeah. And so
got a
there's
bunch of angry people.
All those things that kind of in place, right? Like they shut the rail down. Oh, another one, protests. And the big one, not the big one, but one of the big ones. It'd be much better if Pete Buttigieg resigned, right? But that would be the problem. He should have resigned after this, especially considering like we had the water ports and the airports all like in a clusterfuck. Like the airlines are doing all sorts of shady shit and the regulation. Like our transportation system's a fucking mess. And this guy should have resigned. This should have been the nail in his coffin. Like, I think politically, he doesn't have a future. Like, I don't think that he could stand a chance getting elected. Like, he's got too much baggage now because he was literally handed a position he wasn't qualified for. And instead of like faking it until you make it, which is what I would do, you could appoint me to that and I would have done a better job than him, because I have a little bit more integrity and I have an interest in like doing whatever job I'm tasked with well, right?
Well,
Or
and you
he
just
was
listen to
there
other
as a
people.
political appointment because he helped throw the election for Biden and eliminate Bernie, right? Like he played a role in that manipulation of the primary election. So he was handed that position, and he's just that's who they elevate into positions of power, are people who are they check the identity politics boxes. Oh, he fucking likes to take it in the butt. Check. We got one up there. Okay, whatever, right? Like, and that's fine and dandy, whatever. But he checks an identity box, but not any other qualification. And he even doesn't have like the awareness that he's fucking up, kind of like Kamala Harris is like the same. Like they have no awareness that they're not really qualified, and they don't even try to do the job. When people criticize the
I
job
haven't
they're
heard
doing, they're
anything
like,
about her.
"Oh, what? You are a fucking, homophobe, or you hate black people, or whatever it is," right? Like,
I haven't heard anything about
that shit.
Kamala
I'm not sure
Harris.
what you're thinking about that.
Oh, I mean, I haven't heard anything about her. I agree, completely unqualified. And it was just like, hey, you were a presidential candidate. Let's go ahead and give you a job so that you can, further your career and, maybe in, 4, 8, 12 years, like, take another crack at it.
Yeah.
Get some more experience under your belt so that people will believe that you are qualified.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you don't have to be the expert in a position like that. You simply need to listen to the experts.
You need, as an executive, your job, well, his job is the same as most politicians and political appointments. And this is not just Joe Biden's administration. Like Trump
It's
appointed
everywhere.
all sorts of fucking crazy people to do things that
He
they never
appointed
really
his
did the
daughter
job.
and his son-in-law. Like,
Or Mitch
what the fuck
McConnell's
do they
wife
know?
to Secretary of Transportation.
Yeah, like,
Right?
what do they
Like
know?
when
Nothing.
her only experience was that she had a lot of stocks in companies that dealt with logistics.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I am not fucking joking. It's
No,
so
I
corrupt.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, I forget her name, but I think it was Mitch McConnell's wife, if my memory serves me, or some influential politician's wife. And at any rate, like, so we have like an out of touch government, but like there in Greece, not only are like people protesting, which like I understand, it's not the people of East Palestine who's just gone through this crazy fucking trauma and are like trying to figure out how to like move forward and move on with their lives after this happened. It's not their job to protest, but like no one else is protesting. And like I was talking to my folks who like, it's beyond the scope of this conversation, are pretty far down the right wing rabbit hole, as we spoke privately about. They're like pretty fucking like really deep, like disturbingly deep down the right wing rabbit hole. But having a conversation with them about this and how fucked up the situation is in Ohio and with this train derailment, I was like, despite all of our political differences, right? Like, I personally think that like drag story hour is fucking kind of cool. And if someone wants to read a book to my kids so I don't have to read a book to them, I'm all for that. I mean, I read to my kids, but like if someone else also wants to read to my kids, like more power to you, right? They might be against something like that. But even with these different, or guns versus no guns, or whatever the culture war issue is, like something that's probably fair, we can safely generalize, is that among the masses of the country, the not uber wealthy, all of us want a functioning infrastructure that's not risking like destroying our fucking community, right? Would you say that's a controversial political issue to like spend money on infrastructure and have better regulations so shit like that doesn't happen?
No, and that's the entire point of identity politics, though, is to distract from the things that we all actually need in order to get people to focus on things that, like, we're always going to disagree on, and so it'll just tie up the system so that nobody actually has to spend any money on things that would make our lives better, and instead we can just keep going through eternal wars and making a few people very, very rich.
Yeah,
seems to be what we're doing right now.
Precisely. And so why were there no large protests over this? Well, I think
Americans don't protest
disorganized
generally.
People, but also we've been conditioned to not protest. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, I was going to say we don't protest as a country. It's, if you even were to recommend like, hey, maybe we should go like smash up their offices, wherever they happen to be. I'm assuming in Norfolk. maybe we should go smash up their offices until we get some answers. People be like, oh, well, you don't want to break things. That's not the way to go about it. That's not how you get the change you want. And it's like, it absolutely is. And we've discussed it before. Like, no non-violent movement has succeeded without an adjacent movement committing violence. And so we can't even get the non-violent protests going. Like, how are we ever going to get the violent protests going?
I wouldn't say our job is to get the violent protests going, but you're right. We're not even seeing like, there are people confronting politicians and being kind of disruptive, which kind of like is in that gray area. When you get up in someone's face and you're screaming at them, then you can make an argument that that's like not nonviolent, right?
Yeah.
We do see a little bit of that, but on this issue of the train derailment, it's a total missed opportunity, again, beyond the scope of this conversation, because this is just one of two news items plus our main story or main discussion. This is it. I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Bank failures.
No, real quick, I do want to finish up on this. I think that like it's not controversial to want functioning infrastructure. I just don't think people were ready to jump into action. In Greece, it might be some cultural differences, right? But it wasn't just street protests. The fucking labor unions also went on strike.
Yeah. Well, and the thing you have to understand about Europe is that like most European countries have gone through several iterations of, government just in the last like 200 years.
Oh, yeah.
Like they don't like it. They might overthrow the government and put in a new one just to try it out. Hey, this one isn't working. New one.
Greece did that as recently as like 2010.
Yeah.
2011. So, like,
they're used to overthrowing governments and trying a new one, we've had the same one going on fucking near 300 years now, like 250. And, it seems like we're perfectly okay with our non-functioning system as long as, nobody causes too much of a fuss and people aren't starving en masse, as long as it's just a few people starving and you can feel better than the homeless.
And that is coming to a town or city near you.
It's already in mind.
Things are only getting worse. And speaking of conditions worsening, we did want to talk about SVB, but I did have a final thing if you want to come up my screen. I need a second a second monitor.
You do need a second monitor.
So that I can see that you've brought it up without asking you, because I'm switching tabs and not seeing it. I wanted to point this out.
Yeah.
Environmental activist Aaron Brockovich named an Ohio law enforcement report on, quote, special interest terrorism, and threat in East Palestine. So not only do our transportation secretary not resign and not really give a shit and really have to be like pressed pretty hard to even say anything about this historic catastrophe, and the leader, the executive, chief executive, the president of the U.S. has failed to go there and has really not done a whole lot. I do think some federal resources were mobilized for the community. It's largely fallen on the companies to not only police themselves in terms of regulation, but also on the companies to kind of manage the disaster response.
Right.
Which is fucking insane. But I did think that this was something that is uniquely American. Maybe not. But basically, it was in a report. And this is kind of a quote here I'll read. On 24 February, environmental activist Aaron Brockovich is scheduled to be in East Palestine to explain residents' legal rights. Brockovich has urged the community to use common sense and ask questions. Brockovich is also placing blame solely on Norfolk Southern. The police organization assesses that this event could potentially increase tensions within the community. You can come back 90.
Probably.
And I just think that that's fascinating because, again, not only do we completely botch it, but like we're like, oh shit, those people who are genuine, and you can go online and see tons of clips of council meetings and information meetings,
Right.
and the people are genuinely like grown, rough around the edges, men, working class, fucking dudes who are like in fucking tears, like being like, my house lost all of its value.
Mhm.
Like, you destroyed what little I've been able to scrape together for my retirement. And like,
Right.
where is that made whole? Like, how are you going to help me make this whole? And the answer is no. And so it's funny that Erin Brockovich is going with the way that Erin Brockovich does, and she's an activist particularly for water, right? And against corporate pollution. But
Right.
like, she's going there to be like, hey, you have these rights. I know the law because I've literally been doing this for fucking decades. Like,
They made a
helping
movie about me.
get redress and settlements from companies who poison them. And then the police agencies are like putting across the wire, hey, she's coming here telling them that they have rights. Like, this could potentially make the situation, like make the population a little less compliant to the bullshit we're feeding them. Therefore, you are a special interest. A special interest terrorist is just in the article explains it, just refers to whereas like a terrorist like will use violence and violent tactics for broad political objectives. A special interest terrorist is someone who will use violence or stoke violence for a particular interest.
Right. And
For a special one. That's
for
all.
anyone who doesn't know the definition of a terrorist, it's anyone who goes against the mainstream narrative. Because you can get labeled a terrorist for a great many things, a lot of which are not even remotely terror-inducing.
Yeah. So yeah, you're a terrorist if you tell people that they have rights and that they should stand up for themselves and use common sense. Like, if you feel like your house is like poisoning you, like if you walk into it and your eyes get irritated, don't listen to the fucking report that was funded by the company.
Yeah.
Like, use your gut. Like, if you think something's wrong, something is probably wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at any rate, with that said, we're all terrorists and we're going to continue to be terrorists because like the system is doubling down on making us criminals and trying to keep it going just long enough for them to fucking extract the uber elite to extract as much from us and from the environment as it can before the whole system goes bust. And maybe the system, I don't think it's going bust, but Silicon Valley Bank, one of the top 20 largest financial institutions, as I understand it, in the country. Being in Silicon Valley, I mean, I think they have a pretty broad portfolio. But I think they had a heavy interest in like venture capital, kind of like startup stuff.
That is,
and so they always had a
stuff.
riskier portfolio than like, Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase, right? Like, their balance sheet was always kind of like on the riskier end of financial transactions. At any rate, let's pull up. We have a couple things going on here, if I can find them. Yeah, so we're going to have a quick discussion of SVB bank failures. Again, France 24. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
All happened in the blink of an eye. On Wednesday, Silicon Valley Bank announced that it had sold assets at a loss and that it needed more than $2 billion to improve its balance sheet. Then panic, rumors spreading like wildfire among the very tech industry that this bank had served for more than 40 years. Anxious customers withdrawing billions of dollars in just a few hours. Things got so bad that by Friday morning, the federal regulator decided it had to step in to stop the bloodbath. It closed the bank and seized its assets. One investor saying this was a perfect example of an industry cutting its nose off to spite its face. Now, what happens next is unclear. Some of its customers will be getting their insured deposits back by Monday morning. Now, insured deposits only cover up to $250,000, which is a minority of customers at Silicon Valley Bank. So one of the most immediate risks could be for employees at tech startups who may not be getting paid anytime soon. Now, The government has tried to reassure Americans, saying that this is not at all like 2008. 15 years ago, banks were taking excessive risks and people thought everything was fine. Now people are concerned, but financial analysts believe that underneath the surface, banks are at their most resilient that they've been in many, many years. Still, though, this bank's failure could have a significant impact on the tech industry, which has already been weakened by the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes and, of course, by inflation.
Yep. So, and I, again, am not an expert on this stuff, and I never pretend to be. Actually, I'm not an expert really on anything. I kind of borderline being an expert of sorts in like horticultural things. In some areas of horticulture, I'm not an expert on, greenhouse production or anything. But I'm definitely not an expert. But as I understand it, like this was the worry, like way back when the Fed was talking about raising interest rates to curb inflation and to slow down the kind of overheating we were witnessing. And this is what happens all the time, right? On the business cycle, right? They're like, oh shit, like we need to do something about this inflation. So we're going to make it harder to borrow money and maybe slow things down. Even though my understanding is that like, that's not necessarily the best course of action.
Yeah. I watched a great interview where I believe it was Nancy Pelosi talking to one of the members of the Fed, and she basically said, like, hey, why did you use this tool? And he said, well, it's one of the few tools we have. And so, like, in his mind, he's like, have hammer, must use hammer, even if I'm like trying to wash dishes, hammer, the dishes, because it's the only tool I've got. And it's like, you could just not use a tool. You could just wait for some other solution, talk to people, figure out some other thing that you can do aside from just smacking your dishes with a hammer.
Yeah, the whole like Nancy or Pelosi and hammer in the same kind of analogy
I think it was Pelosi. It might have been
no,
it
I'm
was
just
the woman
saying,
who
remember,
ran for
her,
president and had glasses.
like her husband got attacked by someone with
No, okay, not her. It was the one who was running for president in the primary in 2020 against Biden, equally old. I forget her name.
Yeah. At any rate, so like this was always a worry, right? Like, so after 2008, basically, like the Fed gave the biggest banks money at essentially 0% interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then they turned around and loaned it out at 22% for a credit card, or 4% for a mortgage, or whatever, 6% for a car note, or whatever, right? Like rates are kind of
did stock buybacks.
Yeah, and they wound up doing stock buybacks and other things to like make them look really good on paper, even though like the fundamentals of cash flow in their business organizations was not necessarily great.
Yeah.
And that's how you wind up with things like Kmart going under, and all and Sears and all that other kinds of shit. But my point being is that like there is always going to be some kind of consequence when you give free money as like the fix to like things being fucked up, and then you don't go back and like ensure that the fundamentals are strong. You're kind of just relying on this fix, but oh shit, this fix has consequences, right? So then we're going to make some changes to like stop inflation without really like, I mean, they consider it. I'm not saying they don't, but like at the point it is cost benefit, it was better to try and slow down or slow down inflation for the social consequences and therefore the political consequences of inflation, right? Like political instability when people can't go about their daily life the same way, or it gets much harder to feed yourself or repair your car or whatever it is. But they chose to make these measures, even though as early as like 2009 or 2010 shit was, I was reading like when I think it was around then when they started the program of quantitative easing, like, and this 0% loaning of money to the big banks. And I remember people that I followed back then being like, they will not be able to get out of this. Like they're putting themselves in a position where they can't roll it back because the consequences will be just a slip right back into financial system not functioning.
Right.
And so we did want to talk a little bit about SVB, and that is, I think, a really good one. There's also another short clip about the systemic risk.
I just wanted to give a little brief as someone who used to work at a bank.
Oh yeah, you were.
Yeah,
you were.
they mentioned the $250,000 FDIC insurance. There is a for-profit company that banks can work with that will say you have a CD and it's approaching that $250,000 limit. They will take everything in excess of that $250,000 and transfer it over to another bank for you for a small fee. And that way you don't have any unprotected money at that bank, because the $250,000 is not just countrywide, it is a per bank insurance policy. And so by doing that, you could basically protect a nearly infinite amount of money as long as you have enough banks.
Yeah,
So like,
that's some good perspective.
It's basically a tool by the rich to make sure that they're protected. Obviously, here you couldn't do that, as you had a whole lot of companies who needed access to the money in a fast, liquid way in order to, pay for things. But yeah, if you're like someone who's just truly rich and sitting on a whole bunch of cash and you don't have anything else to do with it, you could put it in a bank and have a company take care of it for you.
Right. And so there's already like we were talking about like tech layoffs and how the tech sector was looking like it was going to be in rough shape over the next few years. That's what most analysts were saying. Just due again to the fundamentals, right? And the business cycle. And so it makes sense that a bank that primarily services venture capital, tech startups, and all this stuff would see some kind of balance sheet shakeup as the industry at large was going through some pretty fundamental kind of restructuring or changes, right? Like a shrinkage of sorts as they laid off workers. They cut like things that like they were interested in doing that could be potential profit makers down the road, but like the development of it costs a lot of money. So they're like, let's close those down and no longer work on the development of those things for now until like our cash flow gets better or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And then there is a conversation, CNBC. We know that NBC Universal likes to fucking flag things for copyright infringement. So this is a much shorter clip, but I thought it was still important to include, especially since CNBC is kind of like, it's kind of like the Wall Street Journal and these other publications. Like they have, it's weird because they have an ability to like report, but their reporting can also influence decision making.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there's this like
feedback
relationship there.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the feedback. So let's listen to this short clip from CNBC about
is what we're seeing
risk.
here. Is this an isolated incident or is this a sign of systemic risk?
Well, good morning, Frank. Yeah, I think it's isolated. Silicon Valley Bank had two issues that are, put it in the specialty category for one, and I think, just trouble spots. One is a very high deposit ratio in terms of a funding source, and we find out when venture capital firms, others, these startups rather want to remove funds, it puts undue pressure really on the organization. And secondly, of course, catering to a specific area of the economy in terms of technology startups. So, I don't think this is a reason for worry. Yesterday's bank performances, clearly had the air of contagion fears, but I don't think this is something that is systemic in the bank industry.
All right, so you're saying there's not a big reason to worry, but
yeah, I think that was the end
That
of
was
that
it,
clip.
yeah.
We might have watched a little more.
2 seconds.
What's that?
2 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think that's important, right? Like there's a lot of, especially like on the conspiracy theory end, a friend of mine shared a lot of stuff with me and a lot of his stuff borderlines in that occupies that realm. And some are like, oh God, this is like, of course they're like downplaying it or whatever. And like, look at these politicians stepping up. I think Joe Biden over the weekend, because these clips were from like Friday or something.
Right.
And
the bank didn't even close
just
down
fucking
until
happened.
Yeah, it didn't even get closed down until Sunday. So
yeah, exactly. And then the Fed stepped in, and some people are like, "Oh, the Feds are stepping in to make sure that the rich people get their money." And I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah, the main thing that I see that I'm kind of like, I don't like the way it's being reported, is that our people are calling the insurance payments, the FDIC insurance payments, a bailout, a-
No,
and that's not. That's the
no.
whole point of the insurance. Now, if we say that the people that are invested in the bank are going to get their money back, that's when it moves in from just regular insurance that hasn't been tested a whole lot to something that we should all be concerned about, because that means it's basically socialism for banks, and the rest of us get to suck it up.
Well, no, that's exactly my understanding is what's going to happen. I heard somewhere, I didn't include the clip.
I've heard the opposite. Joe Biden basically said, like, hey, this is capitalism, you make investments, sometimes you lose.
Internet will tell us.
You looking it up, folks?
And the thing is that like when you're dealing with yeah, so Yellen ruled it out. That's 2 days ago. And then 7 hours ago. Yeah, no, 7 hours ago from the New York Post. Here, come
Where
up.
you see? Yeah,
tab.
I'm on you.
Billionaire hedge fund titan Ken Griffiths slammed U.S. government's decision to backstop all depositors who had money in Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah, but that's still the basically what's going on there is people who had in excess of the $250,000 minimum guaranteed insurance are still being paid the full amount. But again, those are depositors, not investors.
Yes, but like my understanding is that the thing with Silicon Valley Bank was that like a lot of these like venture capital startup companies and all these startup tech companies like had their corporate accounts.
Right.
So that's not really that they're depositors, but
Yeah.
they are not investors, right?
Right. And what that was saying, from what I saw, was basically saying that the depositors, all depositors who had money.
Right, but that's still the we have a system, FDIC insurance, and I should talk to I have a buddy that's been working at the FDIC for fucking ever. His like LinkedIn is just, he looks really badass on paper, but he's been working as a financial auditor in various government departments, and he's spent a lot of time at FDIC. I'm not sure if he's still at FDIC. It's been a while since I talked to him. But he did work there. And it's insurance that came out of the Great Depression, right? So we didn't have that again. So if banks failed, like mom and pops weren't fucked because they had a savings account and now they have access to none of their wealth, right? Like that's what FDIC is, and it's capped at that 250. Stepping in beyond that 250 is a handout.
It is
like,
voluntary, yeah.
Because the FDIC, that 250,000 was meant to protect people, not protect the deposits of big fucking companies.
Now, I would argue that that amount hasn't changed since its inception, as far as I know. So, is $250,000 even enough for a mom and pop to retire on? Like, I think the current quote is you got to have $1 million in savings if you want to retire.
Yeah, but realistically speaking, dude, like in a country where like almost half of the families can't afford a $500 emergency, if you have like more than 250 grand just sitting in a bank,
right?
We're not talking about home equity or
stock
other
programs.
What did you call it? Fixed assets or other non-liquid assets, right? Not cash. If you got like 400 grand sitting in a fucking savings account somewhere that's not in, locked up in some other kind of instrument like bonds or mutual funds or whatever, right? Like, how many of you are there? Like nationwide, right? Like,
I mean, tens of thousands, I would say.
Very few. And if you got like 500 grand just sitting in your checking account, like, yeah, it sucks to get fucked, but like, it's not going to destroy your life in the same way as it would someone like me who's got a couple 10 grand in cash assets in the bank,
right?
Where it would fuck me like royally if I lost that and didn't have it, right? Whereas if you got 500 grand sitting in your fucking bank account, like, only being insured up to 250 for that. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying I still think it provides adequate protection the way that it was supposed to be, which was just to like provide some kind of floor. I'm a big fan of floors. I'm a big fan of floors when it comes to like, basic income or which we haven't really talked a lot. And I know you know a lot more about basic income than I do, but things like basic income and provisioning medical and dental care to everybody just provides a floor.
Yeah.
It's not like, let's make everybody live like super comfortable lives. I mean, I am for that kind of reallocating social resources for people.
Yeah.
But barring that, a good first step would just to have like a floor. And that's what the FDIC insurance is to me, is it's just a fucking floor to make sure you don't lose everything. Right? Like if you're and there are much more secure places. I mean, but even then, like most debt is held now in treasury bonds, is my understanding. And if the fucking the bricks and they move to like a petro won or something, like our currency is going to lose a fuck ton of its value.
Yeah.
Because it's not needed to trade like major global commodities anymore.
And then those treasury bonds don't mean quite so much.
And then everybody holding what we would now consider, under current circumstances, consider safe and secure, low interest, but safe.
Yeah.
They might not be that safe.
I mean, anybody with real money knows to diversify as much as possible. And so like the ultra rich are going to be just fine, even if the whole country fails.
All the fucking crackpots that have been saying since 9/11 or even before about like stockpiling like fucking gold and silver and shit.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna wind up being the fucking smart ones, dude. I ain't got no gold or silver.
Yeah, but I mean, what'll happen there is it'll be like, I stockpile gold and silver. Let me go somewhere where I can exchange that for a more liquid currency,
and
assuming that well, then they get robbed, followed home, etc. Where is it? I'll shoot your fucking wife. Nothing's 100% safe, and so it's just like, maybe just count on the whole world not falling and invest in a whole bunch of different currencies and shit like that.
Yeah, let's move on to just have a couple more minutes for this.
Yeah.
And do we have another clip of this? We don't.
We do not. That is it for the bank failures. I mean, really, that bank kind of was bound to fail. It was taking a whole lot of risks. I believe what I read was Coinbase was using it as its primary bank for exchanging cash for crypto and things like that. And just that one industry, that one company is very volatile.
So,
like nevertheless, the whole crypto landscape. So it was a risky bank to begin with.
So come back up my feed, please.
Yeah.
I have this article here from The Street. 3 U.S. banks down, one more in focus. Does it end here?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is going to have a fuck ton of ads. I'm sorry.
We got to get you the Brave browser.
I know. I'm just lazy, bro. I'm just lazy. At any rate, I did want to show this because a friend of mine shared it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does cover kind of some of what we're seeing and why, and this might lend to the CNBC about why it is likely not systemic.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the fact they're all medium-sized banks, the common point among the three is that they're not diversified. You had just mentioned that.
Yep.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I was saying too, is that they all kind of like were really heavy in an area that we were saying months ago, because that's what the analysts were saying, right? That like tech was in kind of the forecasts for the tech industry were not great. So, and in this case, Silvergate was one of the banks that failed, bet everything on the emergence and success of cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
And when a liquidity crunch hit the industry last May, followed a few months later by the crash of FTX, Silvergate found itself in trouble. The bank was unable to survive this double whammy and was abandoned by the same clients whose development it had supported. SVB, for its part, was at the center of the ecosystem of startups and small businesses, wineries and farms in the San Francisco Bay Area. The bank was also present in 8 other countries where it supported startups. When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, the existing loans became less valuable. And when the government effectively did by raising interest rates was raising the cost of being a bank.
Yup.
So you can come back 94. Yeah, so I mean we kind of already covered that, but there it is in writing.
Yeah. Well,
Right, like-
really hilarious too is they were so volatile due to their investment in cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin has spiked several $1,000s over the last 3 days. Because this sort of thing, people are like, are banks a good store of value? Can I trust that my money is going to be okay in a bank? Maybe I should, look into this cryptocurrency thing. And so, like, as of 3 days ago, it was valued at 22,000, spiked up to 26 and a half, and it's at 24 and a half right now.
Crypto?
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin only, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I don't
overall.
understand crypto well enough. Like you've tried to explain it, but like I always see things like the internet or anything else that like comes out of a space of like distributed power
Hmm.
and then taking that and it being absorbed into these monolithic fucking highly concentrated, highly complex institutions is always a bad thing.
Oh yeah, basically, the whole idea of cryptocurrency was just like, hey, let's have a distributed ledger so that no one controls everything. And then, of course, yeah, people were like, that's great, but I have to use this cryptocurrency to buy things, and not everyone takes it. So I need a place to exchange for my local currency. Where can I do that? And then you got centralized exchanges, which are a single point of failure. And that's what's happened time and time again, unfortunately, is people keep too much on the exchange because they need that liquidity, or they can't find a way to cash it out in large amounts, whatever, it happens. And then what do? They lose it all when that exchange does some shady shit. Like, okay, followers, if anyone says they can give you interest on your Bitcoin, tell them to fuck off. Keep it in your own wallet. Don't give it don't give it to them. Like, there's no way to do that. You can't make more Bitcoin magically appear than is destined to exist by the algorithm. So they're making that money up somehow. Probably off some other bigger fool.
I did see someone who had made like this like case, it basically a space heater out of like Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea in places that get really cold. I mean, it's a lot of upfront cost, of course, but like if you already have like a computer that's pretty badass for gaming, there's no reason why you can't mine Bitcoin directly, but you can mine like Ethereum and Dogecoin and some of the other ones, and then trade it in for whatever you want. And a watt is a watt is a watt, when it comes to computers. And so if you got like 1,000 watts going into this thing, you have yourself 1,000-watt space heater. And so, like, why not? You just got to find a way to get it, throughout the house is all.
Yeah, I think they were just using it to warm up like a single room.
Yeah.
Okay, at any rate, it might be worthwhile to talk about that because another video a friend shared on the banking crisis by someone who calls himself Really Grateful, which is how you to take them serious. But at any rate, was talking about like how that this is a backdoor, like the government's response and coming in and bailing out all these depositors. It's this is going to, unlike other analysts that are like, oh no, they weren't diversified, even though they're larger institutions, it really doesn't have much systemic effect because they didn't have their hands in everything, right?
Okay.
So it'll be fairly isolated. I guess where we live, it's probably a much bigger deal in California because they provided financing to wineries and farming and all sorts of other things in the region. And remember, like San Francisco Bay Area, what is the West Coast financial center? It is the equivalent of New York on the East Coast or Chicago in the Midwest. And so like finance is a huge industry there. So it might have some knock-on effects, but this individual was saying that like it's a backdoor to like the government instituting some like digital like currency that they control. And I'd really like to maybe in a future show do a deeper dive on that because it's like part of the whole WEF kind of one world order government stuff.
I mean, we could just stream the show Mr. Robot. That's basically what it's about.
I don't think we can do that without violating copyright.
Probably not. But
Is that what that's about? It's like a one world digital currency?
Yeah, it's basically an orchestrated a hacker group orchestrates the collapse of a major company, basically Google, and that locks up. They have a lot of their hands in banking and stuff like that, and so that locks up a whole bunch of money. People can't get their money; they lose faith in the dollar bill, and then that company says, like, "Hey, well, we can have a coin that is digitally accessible, and everyone can use that." And the government's like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. Just get us out of this shit." And they're like, "Cool, now we control everything." And then the rest of the show is about the hackers figuring out how to unfuck the thing they just did,
Okay.
having made a greater evil than existed.
It might be
prior to
worth
that.
doing like a whole show just on currency too, because
Yeah.
I have my ideas from books I've read about what currency is, what currency could be.
I mean, really, it's just a way to make exchanges of goods and services easier. That's at its core.
Sure, that's not largely well understood, and it might inform a discussion about
Gotcha.
the evils of a one world digital currency or whatever. So, at any rate, we are ready to talk about
astronomy. No, astrology. Okay, two different things. First of all, two different things. Astronomy, study stars. Astrology, study planets and stars.
Venus and Mercury are mad at each other. The financial system is weak.
Yes.
Because of that.
Yep.
Not because capitalism is a fuck.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah, we're going to do a clip of Quartz, which I think really kind of fits with around like the Vice slash other kinds of things that are larger media organizations that
I actually liked this one a lot better than the Vice one that we have later on, but maybe it's just me.
Yeah, and we'll see about time because we did run a little long on that one, and we do want to try and wrap in about an hour and 30. So maybe we'll skip that one. But yeah, this first clip is from Quartz, I believe, and it will just kind of give like a brief history. Did you set timestamps on it?
I did.
Okay, so just a minute or two?
Yeah.
Sounds good. Let's roll.
Astrology had evolved with science, but astrology had a problem. Astrology was all built around the idea that the sun, the planets, and all the stars revolved around Earth. And as science started suggesting otherwise, the astrologers made a bad bet and doubled down. Astrologers started ignoring science. Enter the scientific revolution. With new tools, like telescopes, scientists were redefining the way we understood the universe. But not everyone was on board. For years, Europe's last official court astrologer tried to defend astrology. It didn't go well. It got so bad, he started openly predicting the deaths of former friends. Scientists made him a public laughingstock to convince the rest of Europe that astrology wasn't real science. Around the same time, a college student named Isaac Newton went to the local fair and picked up an astrology book. It didn't make sense to him, but he wanted to understand it better. So he started studying mathematics, and eventually discovered that physics could explain the connections between Earth and the stars far better than astrology ever could. Astrology lost.
Yeah, and go to the show notes for that whole clip. I think it's like 45 minutes or something.
Yeah.
They go all the way back to like ancient Sumeria.
Yeah. Like we didn't have time for it. It was Babylon and
yeah,
we don't have time for all that. But it's just basically saying like it was originally just man observing the heavens, finding patterns as we do, and then applying meaning to them. And it was basically kind of the beginnings of science because it was based upon observation and noticing the effects of your observation. But then, as stated here, at some point, they were like, "Oh, okay, well, we don't really like how that's going, so we're gonna stick with what we got." And then that is where they separated, and you have now the pseudoscience of astrology, and you have the Western accepted sciences of astronomy and physics and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
fair enough.
Yeah. And so, I mean, basically, all everything was, cool and, holding hands up to a certain point, and then just kind of, diverged, and that's where we are now.
Yeah. Let's play the second clip from that quartz little mini doc.
Yeah.
You need to bring it up.
Oh, shit. Good one. Wind that a bit. It's audio messed up.
Rather than these blanket correlations.
Your sun sign or whether Mercury's in retrograde won't actually affect you. But that doesn't mean astrology has no value. Astrology can tell us a lot about how natural rhythms affect our health. It can help us reflect on our relationships and on the way we make decisions. And for what it's worth, it can help people feel connected with ancient history and the universe. Astrology isn't science, but maybe that's the wrong way to think about it.
And I like that statement because a lot of people who use astrology more effectively, they use it as a self-reflection tool, as opposed to, there are people that just look at the horoscope and and then at the end of the day they're like, oh yeah, that did kind of happen to me. And then there's people that actually utilize the tendencies that are written into astrology to kind of analyze themselves and make changes in their lives if they don't like what they see. I think that's it's a bit more rare, but you also don't hear as much about that because it's a bit more cerebral, and people prefer to just talk about like, my horoscope, and as you said, your Mercury in retrograde and all that stuff.
Yeah. And again, this kind of what we were discussing last week a bit, or last Thursday a bit, and offline, more broadly speaking, like, okay, yeah, it is not a reflection of nature beyond the fact that like some patterns we've seen have been given names, right? Some parts of the sky we see, we just kind of give names to it.
It was utilized for agriculture for a long time,
It still is,
when these stars are in the sky, it's a good time to plant, or when we see these stars, we should harvest. And so there is something to it for those purposes,
right? Which are still absolutely bullshit, because like the stars do not. And there's like a whole thing called biodynamics where they do all this weird stuff, and everything's done by like positions of planets and shit. Like, and to me, that's like, okay, it's probably a placebo, right? Like, you see good results, you associate it with this ceremony. And I'm thinking of like in my mind, like, so like they would do like sacrifice goats or whatever. I'm not an Egyptologist, but like Osiris, I believe, was the god of the Nile, right?
Not an Egyptologist.
So they would do all sorts of these ceremonies and stuff to like usher in a good flood. So because the flood was what replenished the fertility of a lot of their fields. And so they go through this religious ceremony for a good thing, and then if it didn't happen, the gods were mad at you, right? And then so astrology would be like, oh well, things weren't lined up, that's why they weren't. So in that way, it provides an explanation, but it's not. It just rained less.
Yeah, I mean, it is prone to confirmation bias and ignoring failures of predictions.
Yeah. And so in astrology or biodynamics, they would say, okay, well, let's like better tune our system to the stars, because it gives you a false, like you were saying, kind of like in some ways it reinforces bad ways of thinking about how the world works. I, as someone who believes in science, would be like, oh, hydrology, it didn't rain there. Okay, well, how can we mitigate that? Or how can we enhance that, right? Or how can we better predict that? Right. And that's what weather is. We didn't even do an update on the atmospheric river. We'll do it Thursday.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for all the predictive power of science, it was supposed to rain for the last 5 days, and we got like 2 fucking days of rain.
No, did it? I don't know about where you're at. We were getting like 2.5 inches over like a 24-hour period, which is a lot of fucking rain.
Nope. They promised a whole lot, and we got nothing.
Oh, it's
pretty much. I think we might have had like 1.5 inches over the last 5 days.
I think it's just really a narrow band thing.
It is, yeah.
Shifts slightly.
Yeah.
because we're getting like 2 inches right now. It's been
Nice.
fucking dumping buckets all morning.
Let me look. Nope, no rain.
It's not raining, says the guy who rarely leaves his house. You're like, I look through my mini blinds. It's fine.
No, I have curtains. They're high quality.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Mini blinds are for the poor.
Well, mini blinds are pretty standard in apartments. That's all.
They are. We had them to begin with. We took them out, put in shades.
Yeah. I think we removed all our mini blinds too when I moved in.
They just break too easily. They're too cheap.
Yeah.
Planned
Fucking
obsolescence.
God forbid you have a dog or a child. It's like,
oh my God, that's part of it. Yeah, cats are just like, I want to be in the window. The mini blinds are closed. I'm just going to destroy the mini blinds.
Break the mini blinds. Yeah,
break the mini blinds. And now I'm in the window.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I agree to what you're saying, and that's kind of the long version of agreeing with you, is that like when it comes to like just providing some kind of like framework or process for thinking about your life and your decisions and your future, like I think it could have utility just like any other kind of like process, any other kind of process that helps you with thought experiments or any kind of framework for thought experiments. It has a lot of utility, but beyond that, you know, I don't understand it, and maybe I need to read more, but like especially when it comes to biodynamics, like temperature, humidity, those other abiotic factors, soil temperature, right? Soil and air temperature differences. Those things matter a lot. Like periods of cold for like the stratification, cold stratification of seed. If it doesn't get cold enough, then in the winter, then these seeds might sprout early, or they might sprout late, or they might not sprout at all.
Yeah.
Right. And so like those abiotic factors that like we understand them as like temperature is fundamental to chemical reactions. Like, and so it makes sense that there are temperature triggers for certain growth processes, which growth, you know, life is just a particular kind of amalgamation of different chemical processes, right? Like, and so that all makes sense to me, that it could be those, and like the stars aren't like, it's the sun and the moon affects a lot of things like tides and other, because it's close enough to have an effect. And the sun and our position relative to the sun has a lot to do with driving seasonal weather patterns and all sorts of other things. And it's consistent according to like, what do you call them? Planetary mechanics or whatever. There's a term for it. I forget what it's called. But basically like the way things move in like celestial bodies move, right?
Yeah. The complex dance of the planets.
The dance of the planets.
It is predicted that Mercury might get ejected out of this solar system entirely, just due to perturbations by Jupiter. So,
and then what would the fucking astrologists do? Mercury can't be in retrograde. You can't see Mercury.
Mercury is flung the fuck out. It was too fickle.
That son of a bitch.
How are we going to mine it for iron if it gets flung out of the solar system? Damn it. It's a rich source of iron. I want it.
Yeah, I just don't see like stars that are fucking dozens or hundreds or thousands or potentially, I don't know where all these stars are, but like,
well, I mean, things that you need
light years and light years and light years away.
Yeah, things that you need telescopes to literally see.
A mechanical effect, gravity of a star that's, 10 million light years away, or 10,000 light years away, is not affecting your seed germinating in the fucking ground. Like, it's not. Like, I'm sorry, but like, it's time and distance and the effect of kind of the fundamental.
Is this what they were talking about at that retreat thing?
What's that?
The biodynamics or what?
We did talk with some people who used it, and a lot of people who were there as students with me, like, were like, oh no, it's so fucking, like, I'm learning so much about it. It's so useful, and I get all this value out of it. And I'm like, I mean, I understand that Western science is not the only way of knowing, right? Like, I don't think Western science has a monopoly on the creation of knowledge. There's indigenous systems of knowledge, and various other kinds of ways of understanding the world. I refuse to accept, however, that planting that the alignment of stars is more important than the abiotic conditions we know affect plant growth.
Right. And those can be separated and studied in lab conditions where everything is controlled.
Yeah. It's Occam's razor, bro. It's like, what is the simplest explanation? For some people that don't understand that, and these people did not want to learn it either, right? They didn't want to learn more about plant ecology, right?
Which is unfortunate because they paid to learn about plant ecology.
Right.
Like
they don't want to learn that stuff. But because biodynamics fits within their brain is already wired for fucking astrology for whatever goddamn reason, like biodynamics is attractive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it's within a system of knowing that they already grasp. Whereas like, you're like, well, actually that's, whatever second stage photosynthesis or whatever, like, and then they're like, what? And then they're like, oh, biochemistry, like what?
Like we're using
it doesn't make sense.
cycle.
I'm just going to plant according to the stars.
Yeah, well,
and it doesn't work.
Well, when everything goes to hell and they're trying to survive based off biodynamics and they die and you happen upon their corpses later on, you can take their shit.
I'm not talking shit exclusively about biodynamics because I don't understand it very well, and I'll do some more research and come back if I find that I was just a complete asshole about it. But
that could never happen. No, you're right.
But what I'm saying is that it didn't matter how many goats they sacrificed or whatever they throw incenses and things in totems into fire and read the smoke, like that didn't affect the fucking flood.
Yeah, and in the end, those civilizations fell, no matter how many things were.
Some are pretty resilient, right? Like there were successive civilizations in Egypt for fucking thousands of years.
Yeah,
like high civilization, like centers of power. And there will be, because like having a big river and a productive floodplain, like is
it's life on easy mode, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what I keep trying to wrap my head around. And for Northern California, it's like, if we wanted to, we could be the center of a permanent culture because we have a river and a floodplain. Like we could potentially set ourselves up to be, not a place that gets abandoned.
Yeah, but I mean, to be honest, a lot of people in Northern California are too busy coming up with creative ways to cuck the libs to actually focus on something like that. So,
and cuck the libs, they do.
They sure do.
All right, let's watch another clip of this because we're about time. We're about 8 minutes to time.
A recent poll by the National Science Foundation found that 40% of Americans think astrology is a science. Now, the NSF uses this study to decipher the capacity of people to distinguish science from a pseudoscience. York University sociologist Julia Hempel, she has a theory. She thinks that all this astrology stuff is just peddled to women. She says open any women's magazine and you will find the horoscope section in the back. She also talks about general television programming. Shows about mediums and other supernatural occurrences are on networks that have a mainly female audience, whereas networks that are made for men will have programming that focuses on actual science. Male or female, it seems it's all about trying to not be a victim of circumstance, to sort of have some prediction so you can control the outcome of your destiny.
Right, so if you think about it at a sort of biological level, women are controlled sometimes by their hormones. It happens all the time. They have a crazy day and they're like, oh, I don't know what happened. My hormones are exploding and nobody can explain it. Guys don't seem to have that as often. So maybe it's just a function of women trying to feel like they understand their world more, whereas guys sort of already have it all figured out.
They have it all figured out, ladies. We're the ones who need the back page horoscopes.
You will be rich this month.
I don't think that's entirely fair. What I really liked about
No,
that
I mean, I
was
think
that kind of like perception that we perceive, like, is it a gendered thing? And then they're like, well, could it be gendered because it's constructed to be gendered through all these different means, right?
yeah, and I hope that is intended to be a little hyperbolic. I mean,
Oh no, it is.
It definitely
Yeah,
seems
it's a
like it
couple making
is.
fun of each other.
But kind of looked like she was swiping left on him at one point.
I think it was just like, I'm ignoring you playing on my phone.
Oh, gotcha.
What that was, yeah.
Fubbing. There's a term for it now.
Oh, is there?
It's using your phone to snub someone. Fubbing.
Ooh, fubbing.
Enjoy that one.
Is it spelled with a PH or an F?
It is a PH. Yeah.
Nice.
Better get to it. No, okay, go ahead. I'll get it back.
No. I do think that it is interesting that it is gendered, and it's not just gendered because there are male identifying like gay men that are also very into it. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of it might be cultural, right? Like they're saying.
Yeah, I remember I was reading an article. I'll have to link it because I don't have it like queued up at the right point. But basically, it was saying that like most of Western science and stuff is based from a cisgendered white male point of view, and in the past, when women have come up with their own rituals and things like that, they've been either ignored, laughed at, or eradicated.
The stake.
No, precisely.
Literally.
Eradicated, burn at the stake. Yeah, and so like it makes sense that like women would be ready for something like this, and that it would be aimed specifically at women, because why would you want to believe in the very thing that's keeping you down? So that is at least a small portion of why at least as this video is pointing out, a larger percentage of women believe in astrology than do men. Because
and kind of that whole like you want to feel in control, like right, like, and we live in a capitalist society where scientific management is like, and Foucault talks about this concept of biopower and how power is exerted over life, and specifically over human beings, right? Like, and how science is then used to kind of like manage populations, which really kind of curtails more organic expressions of our humanity and our desires for concepts like freedom or whatever else, right? Like, and so there is this kind of like control that comes out of that. And in some other thinkers that I admire a lot who do believe in science, but also have spent a considerable amount of their time researching with and engaging with concepts from what they call the occult, but basically these kinds of
term.
Yeah, it's a great term, but basically like fringe things, or pseudosciences, right? And they recognize that like while science is there, that like all of these other systems do have do impart like a sense of agency in terms of being able to navigate like your thinking and navigate your life, and therefore like give a sense of empowerment, right? In a world where science has so disempowered us. So like it makes sense that there's kind of a resurgence of it, and that it especially is more common among a population that has, in many real ways and also just as a matter of perception, feel like the system is holding them back or fucking them over or whatever.
And you mentioned very early on that it is making a resurgence. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. You have an entire generation to 2.5 generations that's just being robbed of everything that they were supposed to have, and so you got to look for meaning somewhere. And the thing is, like, humans are spiritual beings. Like, we look for that thing that is bigger than ourselves. We, as far as we can tell from our from archaeology, we always have, like from the very earliest times when we got together in groups. We were like attributing bigger things to ourselves and to what we saw. And so it absolutely makes sense that people would want to find this meaning. And like, I personally have no problem with anyone using religion, psychology, astrology, whatever it is, if it helps them to reflect upon themselves and become better human beings. But like, please, go ahead and do it. But I do take exception when a shitty human being uses those things to justify their shittiness and then not try to change themselves. When someone, I mean, this is hyperbole, but someone burns down your house and they're like, oh, that's so Leo of me, or whatever, like, that's where I draw the line of thinking that it's acceptable. You need to not excuse your behavior, you need to analyze your behavior. And
Right.
that is what a lot of people that are into astrology nowadays are doing, is they are analyzing their behavior and trying to find meaning behind it, while at the same time actually improving themselves, which is something that not a lot of people would be doing elsewise.
Yeah. Agree 100%. Let's move on to this last clip. And I think the reason that I want to include that, does this have him talking to the blonde lady?
Yes.
Okay.
Huckster.
Because they talk about like that it's not just the back page horoscope in the women's magazine where you're like, oh, the month of your birth matters. That like,
right,
every time it fails to explain something, they add another fucking layer to it until it gets so complex that it's incomprehensible. But in the process of moving you to that incomprehensible place, they've tried to convince you that that it means more than it does,
and that it's methodical, and that it has
and that there's an order
reason
to it.
Yeah. And I had mentioned this a particular video to my wife, and she said, like, if anyone's offering to charge you money for this, run. Like, this is something that people in the astrology group will freely share with you, because it's basically like an extended friend group. And you want to help each other get through things, and this is just one other way to do it. Like, we do a podcast, that's how we stay sane. And other people do astrology. So,
well, there's actually there's like 2 or 3 palm readers on my end of East Avenue.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how much of that is like, because like smart people might be like, I'm going to operate a home business and be like, well, this is where I meet clients. So like in these 2 rooms, so like half of my house is a fucking tax deduction, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a bad idea, even if you have no customers, even if no one comes in. That's not your fault. You're just paying for a business license. You get like 1 customer a month and probably be okay. Like, do your other job, and get 1 customer a month. Maybe you do, their hair or their nails while you're doing it.
Yeah. And a home-based business, like, license from the city is probably going to, depending on your circumstances, may cost you considerably less than you're actually saving from taxes. So you net saving taxes, because now you're able to be like, a third of my house is like a business expense.
And I'm all about that shit, because the rich do it. So work the system.
Yeah. So you're saying I need to open up a palm reading thing?
Palm reading.
Help but think that,
you need to turn your
fronts for like sex work.
You need to. You'll have to do some investigative journalism. Also, you should turn your entire backyard into a permaculture, course. And even if you don't get any students, you can still write it off.
I have actually thought that. I've also considered, if I'm able to put together the resources and buy property, that I would structure it as a church.
Yeah. The Church of Perpetual Exemption from John Oliver. It's already there for you. You have a support network.
Yep.
I have thought about it as well.
Remember, I'm ordained, bro.
We would be the Church of Perpetual Appraisal.
Appraisal?
Yeah. All right, let's get this going.
Back in Britain, given how the moon seems to be turning the colour of blood here since Brexit, this seemed like a good place to start hunting omens.
To get a grip on the state of astrology today, I've come to Chiswick to meet the kind of astrologer Harrods would sell you.
Caroline Faulkner is Harrod's in-house astrologer, the one the sheikhs and the Russian oligarchs have on speed dial when they run into a Leo going berserk. For a little over £150 an hour, you too can indulge in her self-created specialty of dynamic astrology, which, of course, is better than astrology just sort of flopping about. She also sells her own range of perfumes on the Harrods website, the Star Sense, and has helped in designing astro-nutritive skincare sessions for the likes of Dolce & Gabbana. If it was good enough for the enemies of Elton John, it must be good enough for me.
You are the astrologer for Harrods.
I am. I have worked with some international royalty. I've worked with millionaires, and I've worked with people who have absolutely nothing.
So could you just talk me through maybe how we read our natal charts?
All you need to find out is your sun sign, your rising sign, which is determined by the time you were born, and your moon sign.
Natal charts are serious astrology, based on place and time of birth. They don't just take into account the classic newspaper horoscope, sun sign, Taurus or whatever, but also all the little fiddly planets rising and falling around it.
And you're going to draw my chart today, are you?
This is your full chart here, okay? Because you've got Sagittarius rising, your rising sign governs your direct personality.
Caroline laid it on with an elegant, golden-crusted Harrods spoon. She told me that I was wonderful, creative, an impish spirit, by turns serious and playful, and that I should go after my dreams, worry less, and live more.
You've got a good sense of timing, but you can sometimes disempower people very quickly with your smarts.
Okay.
Yeah, still with me?
All great advice, also available at a range of lower-cost motivational posters. At her price per insight, it was also great that she was smiling and buttering me up when she gave it, but would cheaper advice be any less effective? In an age that has brought us the scientific wonders of the atom bomb and the face swap app, what is the man in the street still getting from astrology?
Why is astrology not bullshit? In a way, it helps you make decisions. If you read something about what will happen or what should happen. Did you first become aware of your star sign?
When somebody said something about my star sign that I liked, you know, because you don't believe in star signs unless somebody says, oh yeah, your star sign, you guys are all like you're really intelligent, and then you're like, you know what? I am intelligent. Star signs do have a little bit of truth to them.
I mean, do you think there's any point in it?
I think it's a lot of for comfort. Like, I don't have any direction in my life, so I'm going to read this and go with that.
Do you know anyone who really believes in astrology?
Most of my friends, my family, they believe in science, they believe in God, they believe in astrology, they believe in most of the things, and I think it's quite contradictory.
I don't think there's anything wrong with doing something if it's for fun. I certainly wouldn't take anything like that seriously. You know, like stones or healing powers or what the sky says about your future.
Caroline.
There is seriously. Yeah, there's a point later in the video where he goes and does a second meeting with a different
that
woman.
eccentric ass motherfucker.
Watch that, everyone. It is.
Go to the show notes. Watch the whole thing. Watch everything.
He leaves more flustered and more unsure of himself than when he entered.
I didn't even get that far because, like, I thought that that those four people he spoke to on the street gave a really great summary of like why, right?
A wide range.
I
of
didn't
answers.
really believe it until someone said that it meant something good about me, right?
Yeah, it meant that I was smart.
Yeah, or in that one where it's like, you know, if it helps people make decisions, then sure, but like let's not take it to being like this is going to cure your cancer, right? Like
here's some self-analysis. That man is an asshole, but I love his sense of humor, so I'm probably an asshole too.
Yeah, and it's just kind of meant to be like a little satirical bit, like, you know. But anyway, I think that like I think there's a lot to people finding value in it.
Yeah,
I think the reason I wanted to discuss this as per our earlier conversation was that I'm like, right, instead of being like learning all this stuff about how if the stars are properly aligned, then your plants will grow well. Why don't you just learn more about fucking plant ecology?
Yeah, and for me, you know, it's no worse, and in fact, many ways better than a lot of the established, religions, and it gives people much of the same thing. So I'm all for it in that instance. It just like don't try to make it a science. Just admit that it's for fun and that it's kind of based on some wibbly wobbly stuff, and take it at that value, you know. But maybe don't like try to mix yourself in and say that you're scientific.
Yeah. And we didn't really get to it. He kind of touched on it in there where he's like, and she's busy like buttering me up.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because he could see that a lot of it, and like when I was in college, like I had a number of friends that were like really into tarot, and were
Mhm.
like, no, this is totally so powerful. Like,
Right.
but it was based on like the person, a good tarot reader will be able to get information that helps them through an introductory conversation before the reading begins, or by talking to a friend of theirs, like,
Mhm.
oh, you were recommended by so and so, yeah, blah blah blah, like using conversation to kind of establish some basic trends. And then you also feed it with, oh, are you anxious about anything today? Like, what is your intention, right? Because like setting intentions is again a way for the reader to be like, okay, these are things they want to hear about, right?
Right, and it's a good way to get that person to talk and to think about themselves. Like, I actually think tarot is pretty awesome in terms of like
It is.
getting you to analyze how you're feeling.
Yeah,
Because
again,
oftentimes that's so hard.
it really is. And it
Yeah.
is a tool. And I totally acknowledge this as a tool, but I'm saying that like the people who are proficient at like making people walk away and feel good
Mhm.
are utilizing things more. They're not just reading cards and they're like, oh, because of this, like this.
Right,
Like,
right.
no, they're taking that person with the cards not even a factor, and figuring things about them, and then like you said, kind of almost being a therapist in some way.
Yeah, and it's funny, much like an RPG, it is a collaborative storytelling session.
Mhm. Yeah.
Where the cards act like the dice.
What's
They
really
just kind of help you guide everything.
Yeah, and if we want to use this, like we live in this society that's so alienating and so yeah, disempowering, that if like folks want to use this stuff for feeling empowered, to go have a tarot reading and have this person feed them what they want to hear, right? Because no one's going into a tarot reading and being like, "Ooh, shit. This actually says that like you're going to lose everything. Someone super close to you is going to die, and then you're
Yeah, it only
probably going
happens
to
in the movies.
also like have some other, shit happen to you." Right? That's not how they are. They're like, "Oh, you're so smart and you're so."
Yeah. You'll see it in the movies because it makes for good story. Like, oh, the death card, you will die soon, like makes for a good story and like plot piece. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've never heard of
Yeah.
anybody actually doing that, like, oh no. Yeah.
Yeah, if the death card is on the deck or whatever position it's in, you're like, okay, well, maybe that could be something like your old way of thinking
Yeah, or a
being
relationship will end.
overcome and in a sense dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like a relationship will end or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So that tends to be more how it is. I think that's all we had. I think we covered it all.
We really did. And so, like, if you want to believe that shit, that's great. But like, please, like,
focus on the topic at hand when important things happen.
please, like, take some of the time you've invested in becoming an expert in that and put that towards, like, I'm fine there being experts, right? Like,
I like being an expert.
you don't need 10 people in the same fucking room having this much knowledge, because that means like there's a cumulative 1,000 fucking hours in this space that's been dedicated to ecology, or rather astrology.
Mhm.
And how many hours have been dedicated to plant biology? Fucking none.
Yeah.
And that's my issue.
Right.
It's like you spend fucking 100 hours reading about fucking when to plant your fucking seeds, and you don't understand something like cold stratification or like consistent moisture or whatever, or soil temperature. Like, that's all I'm asking. It's just, sure, if it makes you happy to read about it from time to time, do it. But don't fucking spend your all of your time like trying to master something that really doesn't help you navigate. It might help you in your feelings, and maybe that's why I reject it, because it's holy head space, holy heart space. None of it is material, and I'm a materialist.
Y'all might not
I
know
believe
this.
the world
Steve
is
has no heart.
material. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I said the fans might not know this, but Steve has no heart.
I don't have a heart. I have a little bit of a heart. I keep it guarded.
It's like the Grinch, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I keep it guarded with that like little brass plated fucking Bible in my shirt pocket, like from like.
So I
World
want to
War
say
II and shit.
this: we're not Aaron Brockovich. We're not on a terror list. Mostly because we don't have enough followers. So if you like and subscribe, we might be able to be on a terrorist watch list one day. Help us get on a terrorist watch list, folks. Come on, like and subscribe.
If we really give a shit about fixing things, we are all going to find ourselves on a terror watch list. Why? Because when liberty dies, it dies.
With thunderous applause.
Take it
Everyone
easy,
have
y'all.
a great week. See you on Thursday.
Peace.